Hey boys, it's HarmNone. Today we're going to be going over the fastest off-road class vehicles in all of Grand Theft Auto Online. Now, these aren't necessarily the fastest vehicles around a circuit, however, these are some vehicles that are going to be really good in off-road races in Grand Theft Auto Online. They're also not going to be vehicles that are necessarily the best for climbing Mount Chiliad. It's really just exclusive to off-road class races. Anyway guys, with that being said, we are going to start off with number 10. Alright guys, and at number 10 we have the Coil Brawler. Now, this thing is not necessarily the greatest off-road vehicle ever, although I personally think it's very good. However, it does have a few flaws. We'll get into those later though. We gotta start off with the good, of course, and the good is pretty much everything about this thing. It has really good acceleration, it has really good handling, it has a pretty decent top speed, and it's not a very big vehicle. Like, it is, but it isn't, you know what I mean? Now, the Brawler is, of course, very customizable as well, which doesn't necessarily help with off-road racing, but it is just an extra good feature about this thing that I figured I would mention. The Coil Brawler is definitely a favorite among the off-road community in GTA. I've had one of these things since it came out pretty much, and it's a pretty darn good vehicle, I gotta say. Now, there is one fault with the Coil Brawler, and that is this thing might actually have the worst brakes in all of Grand Theft Auto Online, and I promise I'm not exaggerating. The brakes on the Coil Brawler are terrible. I was just reminded of this when I got into this thing to drive over to the canyon before the start of this video. I can't believe that Rockstar released a car with brakes this bad. It is actually unreal. And before you say it, my brakes are upgraded. Trust me, they are. Okay guys, now we're gonna get into the brake test. Here we go. Hold on, just give me 1 sec to get some speed here. We're gonna brake at the start of the bridge. Do you see how awful that was? It literally took from the start of the bridge to here to stop this thing, and I really wasn't even going that fast. The brakes on this thing are just terrible. They just are. I'm sorry, but they're completely awful. Anyways, the Coil Brawler, still a very good vehicle, a good vehicle for racing nonetheless. Anyway guys, we're gonna move on to number 9. Alright guys, next up we have the Nagasaki Blazer. Now, the Blazer is a classic in GTA Online. This thing has been in the game for pretty much as long as the game has come. Well, it has. It's been out since the game came out. So it's pretty much a certified hood classic within GTA. If you've never driven a Blazer, it's a very good handling vehicle. Obviously, it's a quad bike, so it doesn't exactly weigh a whole lot. So the handling is pretty responsive. Now, this thing has pretty good acceleration, but it has a pretty weak top speed. Obviously, it's a quad bike. So this is really only going to be a good vehicle for doing really short distance circuity sort of off-road races that have a lot of tight twists and turns. If it's a long race where you're going to have to go across a bunch of fields in a straight line, the Blazer's not going to be your first pick, I wouldn't think. It's really not good for that sort of thing, being that it has such a weak top speed. The acceleration though is pretty good, and the handling is pretty good as well. So if you're playing on a more twisty technical sort of off-road circuit, that's when I would take the Blazer. Anyway guys, that's all I got to say about the Blazer. Let's move on to number 8. Alright guys, next up at number 8, of course, we have the Vapid Caracara 4x4. Now, this thing is not necessarily the fastest vehicle around a track, but on an off-road circuit, it is pretty darn good. It is, of course, 4-wheel drive. It has pretty good acceleration, pretty good handling, and a decent top speed for a pickup truck. The Caracara is one of my favorite off-road vehicles in the entire game personally. It is just so good. Now, this vehicle is a little bit more on the expensive side, but it's not too much for it to not even be considered. The Caracara is a solid vehicle. I can vouch for this thing. When it comes to racing, the Caracara is very good, and it honestly could probably be ranked higher on this list. However, I felt like number 8 was a pretty good position for this thing for most tracks. On twistier technical circuits, the Caracara is not going to perform as well as something like the Blazer, for example, because it's just a lot bigger. And it has good acceleration and everything, but it's not the fastest vehicle ever. That's why this thing is ranked at number 8. Overall, it's a very good vehicle. You guys should definitely pick one up if you don't have one already. But if you want to win races, it's probably not going to be with the Caracara 4x4 as much as I love this thing. Anyway guys, let's move on to number 7. Alright guys, and at number 7, of course, we have the Vapid Trophy Truck. One of my favorite off-road vehicles in the entire game. The trophy truck is just, it's so sick. It's such a good vehicle. This thing absolutely shreds off-road. Oh, Now, the trophy truck is just a great off-road vehicle. In free mode, this thing, in my opinion, is one of the best off-road vehicles because it's just so capable. It has insane suspension travel, it's fast, it can climb hills like it's absolutely nothing, like it has great traction. The trophy truck just, it really has no flaws. The only reason that it's ranked this high on the list is just because, well, it doesn't have as good acceleration as most of the other vehicles on the list, which is a shame. Hey, I mean, the trophy truck, we all know what it's capable of, I think. And if you didn't know before, well, you should know now. The trophy truck is amazing. You should definitely buy one if you don't have one already. And it's surprisingly affordable too. It's actually a lot cheaper than I kind of expected it to be. So that's another good feature about this thing. Overall, trophy truck, very, very solid vehicle. Would definitely recommend picking one of these up if you don't have one. And even on the twistier, sort of more technical circuits, I do feel like the trophy truck is still a better vehicle than the Nagasaki Blazer, honestly, because it's just faster and it has a better top speed. And the trophy truck really isn't that big of a vehicle if you think about it. So overall, this is a solid car for most off-road races. I think it's pretty great. Let's move on to number 6. Alright guys, and next up at number 6, of course, we have the Vapid Desert Raid. This is very similar to the trophy truck, just a little tiny bit better in pretty much every single way. Except for looks. In my opinion, the trophy truck looks better, but the Desert Raid is still really sick too. Now the Desert Raid is, like I mentioned, just slightly better in a few categories, so it's just bound to be higher on the list, obviously. Obviously, as you guys can see, it's pretty good for taking out civilians, which, you know, it's an occasional off-road activity, I suppose. Now, the Desert Raid, I have heard, is very, very good for climbing Mount Chiliad, and I haven't honestly tested it for myself, but I can totally see why, because the Desert Raid, this thing shreds, man. It just has a tighter turning circle than the trophy truck. It kind of feels like it has better acceleration as well. I don't know for sure, but it definitely feels like it does. And as far as the top speed goes, I think it's pretty much identical to the trophy truck, so there's not really much to report there. The only thing that I will say about this thing is it seems to get a little bit more tipsy than the trophy truck, which I don't know that that's a great thing, especially for racing on a, you know, an off-road circuit. It is what it is. This thing is better in quite a lot of ways than the trophy truck, so I can't really knock it for anything. So the Desert Raid, like I said with the trophy truck, is probably a pretty good vehicle for more twisty and technical circuits, but you could also take it on longer straightaway sort of races as well. Either way, it's going to be a great vehicle for you. The Desert Raid is certified, man. It's a solid vehicle. I would definitely recommend a Desert Raid as well as the trophy truck for sure. Both of those are pretty much staple vehicles in the off-road category, I feel like, so definitely worth it to own them, I would say. Anyway guys, I think that is pretty much it for number 6. Let's move on to number 5. Alright guys, next up at number 5 we have the Nagasaki Street Blazer. So this is basically a Blazer but just kind of better in every single way. Like, it looks better, handles better, accelerates better, has a better top speed, also has some customization that you can do to it, so pretty much it's just better in every single way, and it's certainly faster, that's for sure. So this is a pretty good vehicle, like I mentioned before with the Blazer, for more technical, twistier circuits that are a little bit shorter maybe and don't have as many straightaways. That is where this and the regular Blazer are going to excel. Both are very, very good vehicles, honestly, and I can definitely say I recommend them both. Obviously, the regular Blazer is a lot cheaper than the Street Blazer, but they are still both very good vehicles. And of course, for the extra price of this thing, you do get a little bit more performance, so it's pretty worth it, I have to say. The Street Blazer just, it handles so well, man. It's crazy how good this thing is. And obviously it has a much better top speed as well, so there's really nothing wrong with this thing. I'd say go for this over the regular Blazer if you have the money to spend. However, the regular Blazer is still a pretty solid pick if you guys don't have a lot of money. Hell, you can even steal a regular Blazer off of the street, so do with that information what you will. Get yourself a Blazer. Anyway guys, we're gonna move on to number 4 now. Alright guys, next up at number 4 we have the Canis Camacho. Now the Camacho is a very, very solid pick one of the better off-roading vehicles in the entire game, and I'm going to explain this a little bit further into the video, but the Camacho is actually technically the second best off-road vehicle in the entire game if certain circumstances are met. So I'll explain that a little further in a few minutes, but the Camacho is basically the second best off-road vehicle in the game. Now, the Camacho basically does everything that the Vapid Caracara does, just a little bit better. I mean, it's just pretty much better in every single way. It accelerates a little bit better, has a better top speed, I would say, and it just kind of handles a little bit better off-road. The vehicle is a little bit heavier than the Caracara as well, which will help it to sort of stay planted on the ground even when you're jumping up and down in the air, over jumps and stuff like that when you're doing some off-road racing. The Camacho is my personal favorite off-road vehicle to race in the entire game because I love how this thing handles. It is just so good off-road, and you can pretty much take a Camacho anywhere you want to go. Like if you want to go at Mount Chiliad with this thing, no problem at all. And another thing that I really like about the Camacho is that it is super customizable. So you can basically make this thing look however you want. You can make it look absolutely crazy, you can make it look really tame. It's a very versatile vehicle, and I really respect it for that. Anyway guys, that is pretty much it for number 4. Let's move on to number 3. Alright guys, next up at number 3 we have the Metabatsu Sanchez. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit further what I meant by the Camacho is technically the second best off-road vehicle in the game. That is because on certain off-road races, bikes are banned, so the Sanchez is only available to be used in certain off-road races, and in others it will not be allowed at all. So when it is allowed, the Sanchez is a better vehicle than the Camacho. However, on all of the circuits where bikes are banned, the Camacho is better than this thing. So kind of complicated, but on certain races you are going to need a Camacho or the car that is next up on the list if you want a pretty good chance of winning, because they are the fastest vehicles. However, on tracks where bikes are allowed, of course, you're going to want a Sanchez or the vehicle that is at number 1. Sanchez is a very solid bike. I have one of these and I've had it for like, well, as long as I've had this character pretty much. You can of course steal them off of the street or buy them off of Southern San Andreas Super Autos for very cheap. I believe like 9 grand or something like that, maybe 7 even. So the Sanchez is a very solid bike, especially for the price. I mean, being third in the off-road category for, you know, 5 figures is not bad, I would say. Sanchez is definitely a bike that I would recommend picking up. It's definitely a vehicle that I think everyone should have in GTA. It's just so solid. Really, I just think that the Sanchez is just, well, it's a great bike, man. You guys should definitely buy one if you don't have one already somehow. Anyway, guys, let's move on to number 2. Alright guys, and next up we have the Maxwell Vagrant at number 2. Now the Vagrant is technically the fastest off-road vehicle in the entire game. However, in a lot of off-road races I wouldn't necessarily recommend using this thing. It is rear-wheel drive only, which can be a bit of a pain on certain off-road tracks. However, it does have really good handling and really good suspension. The Vagrant is extremely capable off-road, but the tail end does on occasion spin out because it is rear wheel drive only, and of course it doesn't have the front wheels with power to drive it out of a drift. So occasionally you can mess yourself up with the Vagrant in an off-road race. It's happened to me, it's happened to my friends. It really sucks. That's why I personally like to use the Camacho, because it has a lot more weight and it is of course 4-wheel drive. So it's going to be a little bit better off-road in most situations, I find personally. However, the Vagrant is just stupidly fast, so if the circuit is more straightaway based than tight and twisty, the Vagrant will probably take off on the Camacho and probably get you a win. Now the other thing that I like better about the Camacho is that if I need to bash somebody out of the way, most of the time people are in Vagrants because it is pretty well known that this is the best off-road vehicle in the game for racing. But the Camacho can of course absolutely pummel this thing if it needs to, because it just weighs so much more. So if you're getting past and you really need to stay in first place or whatever position you're in, you can of course beat Maxwell Vagrants out of your way with the Camacho a lot of the time. So that is a pretty good feature about the Camacho. However, the Vagrant is just so fast, you might just be able to get away from all the Camachos and not even have to worry about that. Overall, the Vagrant is still a very solid car, despite my personal beliefs towards it. It is very good. Anyway guys, that's it for number 2. Let's move on to the conditional number 1 best off-road car in Grand Theft Auto Online. Alright guys, and at number 1 we of course have the Nagasaki BF400. Now the BF400 is of course a bike, so in certain off-road races you will not be able to use the BF400, however in others you will of course. So technically when bikes are banned, the Maxwell Vagrant is actually the fastest off-road vehicle in the entire game. However, when bikes are not banned, of course the BF400 is the fastest off-road vehicle in the game. I personally absolutely love my BF400. It is a pretty cheap motorcycle. I want to say this thing goes for around $200,000, which is not a bad price at all. And for that price, you do get a really solid bike. This thing has great suspension, great acceleration, pretty decent top speed for a bike, very solid. And you can definitely win a lot of off-road races with this thing, especially if you're the only one in a lobby who has it. So do with that information what you will. The BF400 is a very solid bike. I would definitely recommend picking it up if you guys don't have one already. Definitely you need to buy one. Basically, the BF400 is just so much faster than the Vagrant because it is of course very small, so it can just get around a track a lot quicker, and it has a very good turning radius and turning circle. Overall, the BF400 is a very solid off-road vehicle. Obviously, it is technically the best off-roader in the entire game when it is able to be used. So anyway guys, there you have it. That has been the top 10 fastest off-road vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online for racing. If this video helped you out, if you learned something, a like is of course appreciated, if not dislike. Subscribe if you guys are new, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, take care. Peace.